Daniel Carter didn't expect much from Mondays. As a single father juggling part-time delivery work and full-time parenting, his mornings usually began with spilled cereal, a lost sock, and the tired eyes of his 8-year-old son Jake blinking up at him from behind a bowl of lukewarm oatmeal. This Monday, however, decided to outdo itself. After dropping Jake at school and navigating a half-flooded country road outside the small town of Woodpine, Daniel's truck sputtered and stalled in front of the most unexpected sight he'd seen since becoming a widower. A woman, barefoot, disheveled, and very much distressed, perched on a low, hanging branch of a gnarled maple tree, her dress fluttering in the morning wind like a forgotten bedsheet. He blinked, then blinked again. Surely this was a hallucination born from too little sleep and too much caffeine. But no, there she was, muttering to herself, hands clutching the branch like it was a lifeline. Her eyes darted between the ground and the sky, and from what Daniel could make out, she wasn't just stuck, she was terrified. He parked the truck on the side of the road, left the hazard lights blinking, and cautiously stepped out.
"Mom,"
he called, shielding his eyes from the sun. "Are you okay?" The woman flinched at his voice, nearly losing her balance. "Don't come closer," she snapped, though her voice wavered with fear. "I swear I'll jump." "You're only 6 feet off the ground," Daniel said, trying to keep his voice calm. "And you're barefoot. I doubt jumping is a solid option." She paused. Then, in an oddly defensive tone, she replied, "I climbed up here for a reason. I don't doubt that," Daniel said, stepping carefully closer. He could now see that her dress, once probably a pretty floral thing, was stained with dirt and what looked like jam. Her brown hair was tangled, her face streaked with dried tears. "But maybe you'd feel better coming down." She glared at him like he had insulted her pride. "I'm not crazy, you know." Daniel lifted his hands. "Didn't say you were." The woman shifted her weight, causing the branch to creak ominously. "I just needed to get away. They were coming for my girls again." Something in her voice cracked, an edge of desperation that struck Daniel in the chest. "Your girls?" he asked gently. She sniffed, nodding once. "Luna and Lily. They're 5. I told them to stay hidden while I figured out what to do." Her eyes darted to the woods behind the tree. "They're probably scared out of their minds." Daniel followed her gaze. "Are they out there, in the woods?" She nodded again. Daniel hesitated only a second before calling out toward the trees. "Luna, Lily, my name's Daniel. I'm a friend. It's safe to come out." For a moment, there was nothing but the whisper of the breeze. Then, the underbrush rustled, and 2 small figures emerged. Tiny girls with matching tangled curls and dirt-smudged cheeks peeked out from behind a bush, holding each other's hands like their lives depended on it. They looked at their mother in the tree, then at Daniel, wide-eyed and unsure. "There they are," the woman whispered, her voice breaking. "Thank God." Daniel crouched down, giving the girls a small smile. "Hey there. Your mom's gonna be just fine. I'm gonna help her down. Then we can all talk. Okay?" The girls didn't answer, but they didn't run either. Carefully, Daniel climbed the tree from the side, bracing his foot on a knot in the bark. He reached her level in seconds. "All right," he said softly. "One step at a time. You don't have to do it alone." Her lips trembled. "They tried to take them, the social workers. Said I wasn't fit to care for them after my husband died. His parents want custody. But I'm their mother and I—" Her voice broke. Daniel gently placed his hand near hers. "You don't have to explain everything right now. Let's just get you out of the tree, yeah?" She nodded, almost imperceptibly. With his help, she made her way down, slow and shaky, until her feet touched solid earth. She sank to her knees, sobbing into her hands, and the twins rushed to her side, wrapping their small arms around her shoulders. Daniel stood back, giving them space. His mind was spinning. What on earth had he just walked into? And yet, watching them, how the girls clung to her, how she whispered their names like a prayer, he didn't see madness. He saw someone who had been holding on by a thread for far too long. After a moment, he approached again. "Look," he said carefully. "I know you don't know me. and I'm not trying to get involved in something I don't understand. But if you and the girls don't have anywhere to go right now, I have a couch. And snacks, and a son who could use some new friends." The woman looked up at him, eyes red, but suddenly alert. "Why would you help us?" Daniel exhaled. "Because I know what it's like to lose everything, and still have to be strong for a kid who doesn't understand why their world fell apart. And because someone once helped me when I was at rock bottom. This feels like the right thing." The woman studied him for a long moment. Then she whispered, "My name's Ava." Daniel offered his hand. "Daniel, come on, let's get you home." Daniel hadn't planned to bring a stranger and her children into his modest home. But as the battered station wagon pulled into the gravel lot beside his apartment building, he realized that life had stopped following plans the moment his wife died. Now, everything was instinct survival, and doing what felt right, even if it made no sense to anyone else. Eva sat beside him in the passenger seat, still shivering from the chill of fear more than the wind. Her twin daughters, Luna and Lily, huddled in the back seat beside Jake, who had remained mostly quiet, as if sensing the fragile tension of their new passengers. Jake had always been empathetic beyond his years. A gift, Daniel often thought, born from grief and loss. Their two-bedroom apartment wasn't much. Beige walls, second-hand furniture, and the faint smell of cinnamon from the candles Daniel lit to hide the scent of damp laundry and dog food, even though they didn't have a dog. Still, it was warm, safe, and filled with the quiet echoes of love. Photos of Jake with his mother, school drawings pinned crookedly to the fridge, and a bookshelf overflowing with bedtime stories and old cookbooks. Daniel unlocked the door and gestured Ava, and the girls inside. "You can take the couch," he said softly, avoiding her eyes. "And the girls can sleep in Jake's room for tonight. He can bunk with me." Ava hesitated at the threshold like she didn't believe she belonged there. Her eyes darted around the room, lingering on the framed photo of Daniel and his late wife near the door, before settling on the couch like it was too sacred to sit on. The twins, however, were less cautious. They slipped past her, timid but curious, their tiny bare feet padding across the carpet as they gravitated toward the bookshelf. Luna reached for a copy of Goodnight Moon, while Lily pressed her hand to a drawing Jake had colored. Jake glanced up at Daniel for permission. When Daniel nodded, he offered the twins a shy smile. "I have dinosaurs. You can play if you want." The girls looked at Ava. She gave a soft nod, and they cautiously sat cross-legged on the floor beside Jake. Within minutes, plastic T-Rexes and Triceratops were roaming the carpet like they'd always belonged there. Daniel handed Ava a cup of warm chamomile tea. "You don't have to explain anything tonight," he said, sitting across from her. "You're safe here. That's what matters." But Ava, gripping the mug tightly in both hands, began to speak anyway. Her voice was quiet at first, but steady, like someone who had grown used to telling her story in pieces, never knowing who might listen or who might judge. She told him about her husband, Darren, how he'd been the anchor of their lives until cancer stole him away slowly and cruelly. About how his parents, strict and wealthy, never believed Ava was stable enough to raise children on her own. They'd filed petitions, pushed for custody, and the system, cold and clinical, started leaning in their favor. "I was falling apart," she admitted, her voice cracking. "I was so afraid of losing them. I started doing everything wrong, missing appointments, forgetting bills. I didn't sleep. I barely ate. And then they said I had a breakdown, that I wasn't fit." Daniel listened quietly, his heart tightening. It was a familiar tune. After his wife Laura died, he too had stumbled through a fog of responsibility, heartbreak, and overwhelming exhaustion. He'd nearly lost custody of Jake once when he forgot to fill a prescription during flu season. It wasn't neglect. It was survival, barely. But the world didn't always have compassion for parents who broke under pressure. "You're not crazy," he said gently, echoing the words she had shouted from the tree. "You're a mother who lost everything and is still trying." Ava's lips quivered. "They want to take them again, I know it. The moment they find me, they won't, Daniel said, his voice firmer now. Not while you're here. You're not alone in this anymore. The words hung between them like a fragile promise. Neither of them fully believed it yet, but it was something to hold on to. Over the next few days, the apartment changed in small but significant ways. Ava, slowly regaining her sense of self, began waking up before sunrise to make pancakes, flipping them quietly so she wouldn't wake the kids. The girls started drawing crayon pictures of their new home, always with 4 smiling stick figures and a 5th one, Jake, in between them. The tiny room filled with laughter and occasionally chaos. As Luna insisted, she was a princess warrior and Lily tried to turn the laundry basket into a spaceship. Jake, once quiet and guarded, began smiling more, his asthma less triggered, his nightmares less frequent. One afternoon, Daniel returned home to find Ava vacuuming with one hand and holding Lily in the other. She looked flushed, tired, and alive in a way he hadn't seen before. "You don't have to do all this," he said, placing a grocery bag on the counter. "I know," she replied, brushing a loose strand of hair from her face. "But it feels good to feel useful again." Daniel smiled. "You're more than useful, Ava." They shared a look then, one that neither dared name, but it lingered like the soft hum of a song neither had heard in years. That night, as Ava tucked her daughters into their borrowed beds and Daniel sat beside Jake, reading a bedtime story, the house felt less like a temporary shelter and more like a home, a chaotic, imperfect, but deeply human home. Daniel couldn't explain it, but every time he passed the living room and saw Ava folding laundry with a quiet smile, or caught the sound of the twins giggling over cereal, something inside him began to heal. He had rescued her, yes, but somewhere along the way, without realizing it, she had started rescuing him too. The quiet comfort that had settled over Daniel's apartment in the weeks following Ava's arrival began to fray like an old threadbare quilt. For a while, it had seemed like the 4 of them, Daniel, Ava, Jake, and the twins, had found something rare: safety, routine, a sense of belonging. But the past, especially one filled with legal threats and broken trust, doesn't stay buried for long. It has a way of clawing its way back up, loud and uninvited. It began with a knock, not the soft kind from friendly neighbors or deliverymen, but the sharp, deliberate kind that made Ava freeze mid-step with a basket of laundry in her arms, her breath caught as if someone had reached in and pinched her lungs. Daniel opened the door, heart already dropping, and there stood 2 strangers in neatly pressed coats and sharp expressions. "Child Protective Services, Mr. Carter," the taller woman asked, holding up a badge. "We've received a report of a woman and 2 children living here illegally. May we come in?" Daniel's hand tightened on the door. "The what grounds?" "Anonymous tip," the man beside her said, glancing past him. "We need to verify the safety and condition of the children in question." Ava stepped into view behind Daniel, her face drained of color, the twins peeking out from behind her legs. It was all too familiar: white walls, forced smiles, clipboard judgments. Her pulse thundered in her ears. "You can't take them," she whispered, barely audible. "No one is taking anyone," Daniel said firmly, blocking the doorway. "Not without a court order." The woman hesitated, sensing the tension. "Mr. Carter, if this woman is residing here without notifying the proper channels, and if she is in violation of custody agreements or court orders, we're required to assess the risk." Daniel looked at Ava. She nodded silently, defeated, and disappeared into the bedroom to retrieve paperwork, documents she had clung to like armor. When she returned, her hands trembled as she handed over the stack: letters from her lawyer, medical records, and a pending appeal against her in-law's custody claim. As the CPS workers read, Daniel knelt beside the girls and Jake. "Everything's okay," he whispered. "Just some adults asking questions. Be brave, all right?" Luna clutched his hand. Lily stared up at him with eyes too old for her age. They had learned too young how to recognize fear in grown-ups. After what felt like hours, the woman handed the documents back. "We'll be in contact. In the meantime, Miss Whitmore should be aware that harboring children outside of approved care arrangements could jeopardize her appeal." When they left, Ava sank onto the couch, Her shoulders caved inward. "It's happening again," she said hollowly. "They're coming for them. I should have never stayed. I'm putting you at risk." "You're not," Daniel said, sitting beside her. "You didn't do anything wrong." "I'm unstable, remember?" she snapped bitterly. "That's what they said. And now I've dragged you into this. Jake could be taken. Your job, your reputation." Daniel took her hand, firm and steady. "Listen to me. You're not unstable. You're a mother who's been backed into a corner, and you're fighting like hell. You're not alone anymore, Ava. You don't have to run this time." Her eyes filled with tears, but she didn't let them fall. Instead, she nodded, slowly. "Then I have to fight the right way. I'll call the lawyer tomorrow. If I go to court again, will you testify? That I'm safe, that I'm fit?" Without hesitation, Daniel answered, "Yes, absolutely." The days that followed were tense. Letters arrived, calls were made. Ava met with her attorney, gathered more evidence, and prepared to face her in-laws in a custody hearing scheduled in 2 weeks. Daniel, meanwhile, rearranged work shifts, spoke to school counselors about the children's progress, and spent every night reading court procedures until his eyes blurred. One evening, Jake asked quietly at bedtime, "Is Ava leaving?" Daniel paused, looking down at his son. "Why do you ask that?" "Because she's scared all the time," Jake said, fiddling with the edge of his blanket. "And I don't want Luna and Lily to go. They're my sisters now." Daniel smiled, heart aching. "No one's going anywhere. We're going to help her stay." At the custody hearing, Ava stood tall beside her lawyer, her hands clasped but steady. Across the room, her in-laws sat in stiff suits, lips pressed in thin lines. Daniel testified, his voice calm but passionate. He spoke of Ava's growth, the warmth of her daughters, and how they had become a part of his and Jake's life. He described breakfasts filled with giggles, bedtime routines shared between 4 small hands, and a woman who had transformed from broken to brave. The judge listened, asked questions, took notes, and finally, in a moment that felt like it split the world into before and after, he ruled that Ava would retain full custody under supervision, with Daniel legally recognized as a temporary guardian and support provider. Outside the courthouse, Ava stood in the sunlight, her arms wrapped around her daughters as if she might never let go. Daniel stood nearby, watching them, when she turned to him. "You saved us," she said simply. He shook his head. "We saved each other." A year passed like pages fluttering in the wind, quietly, steadily, filled with tiny moments that slowly rewrote the lives of those who lived in Daniel Carter's modest apartment. The scars from the past didn't vanish, but they softened. The once temporary arrangement had solidified into something permanent, though no one had spoken it aloud. There was no dramatic proposal, no sudden declarations, just morning coffee shared in silence, sleepy children curled on the couch, and a rhythm of life so ordinary, it felt extraordinary. The apartment, once a space built for 2, had reshaped itself into a home for 5. Jake's room now housed bunk beds with stickers of unicorns and spaceships. The kitchen had become a battlefield of mismatched sippy cups, coloring books, and stray puzzle pieces. Ava's laughter, once hesitant and sparse, now rang through the rooms with confidence, a sound that filled the air like sunlight. She had found part-time work at a local bakery, her hands always dusted with flour, her eyes brighter than Daniel remembered them ever being. Daniel, for his part, had started to breathe again. He had gone from surviving day to actually living. It was strange to think how it all began, with a woman in a tree and 2 little girls hiding in the woods. Now, those same girls greeted him at the door every evening with drawings clutched in their hands, shouting, "Daddy Daniel!" before throwing their arms around his legs. He never corrected them. Not once. One spring afternoon, Daniel stood on the back porch with a cup of coffee, watching as Jake chased Luna and Lily through the grass. The girls squealed with laughter, their braids bouncing, their faces flushed with the pure joy only children knew how to express. Ava stepped beside him, her fingers brushing his. He didn't move away. "They're growing so fast," she murmured, smiling. Daniel nodded. "So is Jake." I swear he was half that size a year ago. Ava turned to look at him, her expression soft. Do you ever miss how things were before? He took a sip of his coffee, then set the cup down. I used to. I missed Laura so much I thought the ache would hollow me out. But now I think she'd be proud of what we've built here. She'd like you. Ava's eyes shimmered with unshed tears. I think Darren would have liked you too. You stepped in when no one else did. He looked at her then, not as a woman he had rescued, but as a woman he respected, cared for, perhaps even loved. You saved yourself, Ava. I just offered you a hand. They fell into a comfortable silence, the kind that needed no filling. The kids collapsed in a heap on the lawn, giggling breathlessly. Jake sat up, brushing grass from his hair, and yelled, "Can we have a picnic? Please." Ava laughed. "You just ate?" "But that was hours ago." Daniel grinned. "I'll order pizza." As the sun dipped below the trees, they spread out an old checkered blanket in the backyard. The pizza came in greasy boxes, and juice boxes replaced wine glasses, but to Daniel, it felt like a 5-star evening. Luna accidentally dropped a slice on the grass, prompting Lily to declare it a tragic loss, and Jake regaled them with a dramatic story about a playground battle involving a plastic sword and a mud puddle. Ava leaned into Daniel's side, her head resting on his shoulder. For the first time in what felt like forever, there was no looming fear, no social workers, no court dates, just them. A family not born by blood but by choice, and by the kind of love that doesn't demand declarations to be real. Later that night, after the kids had fallen asleep and the house was quiet, Daniel stood at the sink, rinsing dishes when Ava joined him. She took the dish towel from his hand and dried a plate. "You know," she said, "I used to think miracles were loud, like lightning strikes or some sign from heaven. But now I think they're quiet, messy, ordinary, like a warm meal, a safe place to sleep, a second chance." Daniel glanced at her, and 3 kids dancing in the living room like lunatics to Baby Shark. She laughed. "Especially that." He wiped his hands and turned to face her fully. "Ava, I don't know where this road is taking us. But I know that since you walked into my life, I've stopped feeling like I'm just getting by. I feel whole again." Her eyes searched his. "So do I." No more words were needed. He pulled her close, and she leaned into him as if she'd always belonged there. In that moment, neither of them were defined by their losses anymore. They were shaped by their love, their resilience, and the quiet miracle they woke up to every day. And as the house settled into peaceful slumber, a photo rested on the mantel. One taken by Jake with his school tablet, 5 people crammed onto the couch. 2 of them asleep, 1 mid-blink, and everyone smiling like they'd finally found where they belonged. They weren't perfect. They weren't traditional. But they were family, and that was miracle enough.